I just find that the sheer aesthetic of the way the blades are all laid down in a swirl in this kind of rhythmic movement is just something that I can't conceive of anything but some amazingly powerful higher force could do, you know.
And when something this magnificent is such a wonderful gift to us, we have to feel good about ourselves. Wow, we've been given this gift, and we can enjoy it and be grateful for it.
You've got to remember, everybody that walks into that field, the first thing they're going to do is be aware of how they feel. That's what these patterns do. They get you back in touch with that energy that is you, that feeling that's inside. I mean, heck, how long has it been since a lot of these people even contacted that side of themselves? And by going into these patterns, it makes you aware of yourself again. It gets you in touch with that feeling side, because humanity has become a little bit insensitive in a lot of ways. And the patterns are starting to help people to rediscover and redefine that sensitivity so that humanity can work as one again instead of little individual islands.
To me, even now, after having lived with this diagram for 2 years, my hair stands on end. I've got goosebumps because, you know, as a designer, if someone came to me and said, look, I want you to design a picture which has got 792 elements somehow and 504 elements, see if you can come up with something interesting. To come up with that, a perfect rotating DNA spiral, encoding those numbers, is in itself a work of genius. But then to find that in a wheat field in August, there, beautifully formed, and it seems to me the most sane way of dealing with this is to accept that this is a demonstration of a level of intelligence and compassion towards us, which is pulling us up. We have to look at the square in the face, and I think it's a truly extraordinary bit of intelligence and geometry.
Again, new seasons bring new crop circles with fresh original designs and new exciting geometry. A circle divided into 13 parts, or divided into 7, 11 and 13 parts. In addition to a row of new fantasy-filled patterns, many of these are pure logos that advertising agencies would demand a great deal of money to develop. Here we can pick and choose for free.
The two isotropic vector metrics coming together. Why is this geometry, for instance, the only geometry that's in perfect equilibrium? Well, I studied a little bit and I realized that actually if you have vectors of forces and you want to create equilibrium, then you would have obviously now this vector that just popped out could express a force, and we'd say that that force has this specific unit which relates to the length of the vector. So bigger the vector, stronger the force, smaller the vector, smaller the force. If you wanted equilibrium, you'd send another vector in the exact opposite direction at the exact same length and you'd get equilibrium. However, this would be a very precarious equilibrium. Nature could not use that equilibrium because any distortion would make the vector collapse. Any forces in any other direction would break the equilibrium. So it was very unlikely that the universe used that type of equilibrium. Well, what would it do? Because this is unstable. What would it do? Well, if you were trying to get an equilibrium yourself, you would probably say, well, I'll just keep adding vectors. Well, if you add vectors at 90-degree angle from the initial vectors, you're still not going to get equilibrium, because now what's going on is that the edge vectors are longer than the vectors to the center, so they're stronger, it implodes, it doesn't work. No equilibrium. So what would you do? you probably continue to add vectors, and you would probably put them at 45 degrees from the initial one. And now you have another problem, that is the edge vectors are shorter than the vectors to the center. Now the geometry explode, is still no equilibrium. So what would happen is that you would have to make sure that the geometry's edge vector and vectors to the center are the same length. And the only geometry in which this happens is like the snow crystals, the hexagon, where the edge vectors are the exact same length as the vectors to the center. And if we made a 3D hexagon together, we would get a vector equilibrium, which is made out of 12 vectors radiating from the center and 12 edge-bounded vectors that maintains the structure in perfect equilibrium, or 8 tetrahedrons coming together, all right, to create, you know, a vector equilibrium. So 8 of these coming together to create a vector equilibrium.
Symbols are about understanding what kind of world we live in, and it explains, it transmits the understanding of how the universe works and the kind of laws we're under. And this is actually a spiritual teaching. Mathematics will go into it and try to explain it from the point of view of matter, of the effect of that on the physical. The ancient knowledge is talking about principles and concepts behind the physical, you see. So to reach that level of understanding, you have to go above the physical. You have to rise your mind above what you can see, touch, feel, taste, and so on. You have to raise above the physical. And in that sense, you're learning, you're growing in understanding. The ancient expression, growing in understanding, that's exactly that. You grow in understanding. Whereas if you bring everything down to, oh, it's not laid properly, oh, it's not quite straight, you bring everything down and you don't look at the symbol, you just look at the physical aspect. You bring it down to your own level of what should be right and what should fit your idea, you know. But this is a chance now. We have to really begin to see the big picture.
Even if you think in advanced physics, for the physicists here, that, you know, of the structure of space, you could think that the vacuum state is going to infinity. At one point, it would have to reduce to the minimum amount of vector for stability, and that would be 12 vectors. So that's the fundamental, basic geometry of equilibrium, but it actually didn't fully work. That is, I still had points on the edge of my metric here, right? I still had vertices on the edge of my metric that had holes in it, right? So there was a symmetry. This middle structure with the 2 isotropic vector metric was completely filled, but the edge was not. So I had still asymmetry. I still didn't have equilibrium. So I started scratching my head some more, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought, okay, well, my only solution is to continue to add tetrahedrons until I get equilibrium at all levels.
It's striking that the basic geometrical forms such as circles, squares, triangles, pentagrams, etc. seem to create the basis for the construction in most of the patterns in crop circles. The principle of the golden section and ratio pi is often repeated in the constructions. Is it the geometry that is the key in understanding the phenomenon, or is it the phenomenon that is the key in understanding a deeper meaning in the geometry?
So I continued to add tetrahedrons. I covered the spaces that were open on the edge of the metric. So I had to add 3 tetrahedrons to every edge, which was 8. So that generated 24 more tetrahedrons. So remember, there's 20 tetrahedron in one isotropic vector metric. 2 makes it 40 plus 24 added up to 64 tetrahedron grid. And that when it came to me. At 64, it all came together. Why is that? Because when I put those added 24 tetrahedron in my head as I was visualizing all this in my van, I realized what I had done. I realized that I had generated a vector equilibrium in the middle, but now I had generated a larger fractal vector equilibrium on the edge. And so now I had a metric that was growing from one vector equilibrium to the other, to the other, to the other. And interestingly, they grew in perfect scale of exactly half the radius, so in harmonic scales or in octaves, if you want.
I think the intelligence behind the crop circles has decided with great wisdom that this conversation, which has a long program and a long agenda, is best established with form.
And it was a three-dimensional fractal. This is actually one of the only true three-dimensional fractal I believe exists. And it grew radially, which is what I needed for the radiation part. And then I realized something even more significant, is that the fractal growth could be generated from 8 star tetrahedron. So 1 star tetrahedron is 8 tetrahedrons coming together to make an octahedron in the middle. Everybody sees that? 8 star tetrahedron, 8 stars like that coming together, okay, to create the vector equilibrium, right? So 8 of these coming together to create the vector equilibrium. And when I realized that, I saw that the star tetrahedron is 8 tetrahedron pointing out, and that the vector equilibrium is 8 pointing in. And now I had both sides of the event horizon, the radiative side and the contractive side, all in one mathematical metric that was producing both to generate the feedback of creation. I was really excited then. I mean, people would, you know, anyway. My van was bumping around, you know, and it's not because I had a girlfriend. So I realized this, and it was like the 8 star tetrahedrons coming together to create the vector equilibrium in the middle. just like this. And when the whole thing was put together, it would generate a vector equilibrium in the middle, right? The vector equilibrium in the middle, and then it would generate the next fractal vector equilibrium on the outside, right?
It's striking that the basic geometrical forms such as circles, squares, triangles, pentagrams, etc. seem to create the basis for the construction in most of the patterns in crop circles. The principle of the golden section and ratio pi is often repeated in the constructions. Is it the geometry that is the key in understanding the phenomenon, or is it the phenomenon that is the key in understanding a deeper meaning in the geometry?
It was radial growth generating scale in the vacuum. So I was really excited. I thought I found something very significant. I was looking now to solve this in terms of physics. How does it apply? How does it, emerge in the physics? And as well, I was starting to think, well, this physics must have, angular momentum, must have dynamics to it. This is not a static thing. This is a fluctuating thing. So how does that all compute?
Here I'm standing at Oliver's Castle at precisely the same spot as John Whaley was standing in August 1996, when he supposedly, for the first time in history, managed to film the creation of a crop circle. That the crop circle was not here the previous day but had appeared the following morning was a fact. That John Whaley was here at dawn could be confirmed by a military patrol jogging by at that time. John returned to the local pub later that same day and played this remarkable footage from his camera. Even so, many believe that he had managed to manipulate the film with computer animation during this short time span, something that computer animation experts doubt. To overlay a perfect animation over a handheld unstable film would need several days of computer work using the equipment of that time. Today the film is still a great mystery. Although confessions now have been made by people claiming to be responsible for it as a hoax, others believe the hoax theory is to be organized debunking, due to the fact that this remarkable footage would have dangerous effect on the public if declared real.
I came across a graphic on the internet of a phenomenon that's called crop circles. And that graphic was a perfect representation of the fractal structure of space I had just described and found in my van jumping around. Now I know that there is hoaxes out there and hoaxers out there, and I know they make crop circles at night with their gumboots and drinking moonshine and stuff. But there is as well a lot of genuine phenomenons that goes on with these crop circles, where it's not obvious to just write it off as people jumping around with gumboots or Doug and Dave out there, having a good time. What got me really interested is that there was a bunch of croppies, people that photographed these things and measured them and all this, that had gone into, they figured out if somebody is trying to talk to us, whoever that is, maybe we should just try to talk back. So they got some gumboots and they went in there and they stomped around in big letters in their field, what do we need to know? And the very next crop circle that came out was this. And that really, struck a chord with me. And if you look carefully, you can see that the way the crops was laid, it made an effect of light and shadow in which you could see the vectors of the tetrahedron that would be creating this metric in three-dimensional space. Now that's not obvious to do in the middle of the night, in the middle of a field. All right? This is not a small thing, it's a large thing, and it's very, very accurate.
Right behind me is Britain's largest radio telescope, the Chilbolton Observatory. And here it was that the greatest sensation in the crop circle history was to appear in the fields right in front of the telescope. On the morning of 14th of August 2001, a formation was discovered which was different from any other previously seen. From the ground it looked like a tangled mess, wisps of crop spread around in no system. However, in the evening with growing shadows, a picture appeared, unmistakably that of a face. That picture represented a whole new technique, a screen technique, the same that's used for printing a picture on paper.
They seem to insist on the pattern. Another one, just like the first one. And this one with another set of information in the middle. In this case, there was another set of fractal division that was going on in the middle. When I looked at it closely, I realized that that set of information was the exact same structure of division, those triangle divisions of space, or these tetrahedron division of space, but in this case, pointing in the opposite direction, going inwards towards infinitely small.
That picture represented a whole new technique, a screen technique, the same that's used for printing a picture on paper. 3 days later, the face was joined by something that looked like a data strip. Rows of counters made out of standing and flattened crop. But soon an astonishing similarity is discovered. In 1974, the astronomer Carl Sagan composed a message that NASA sent into space from the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico. Binary figures which constituted a graphic code presenting key factors about humans and the planet we live on. 27 years later, an identical pattern appears in a crop field right in front of a similar radio telescope. However, on closer inspection, it seemed to show that the code contained some fundamental differences. Sagan's message explained our calculation system, the dominant chemical substances within the elements that create life on Earth, about our DNA code, humans' height and quantity, and that we live on the third planet in our solar system, and lastly, a sketch of our radio telescope. The message received described the same calculation system, but that silicon is most dominant in life forms in contrast to carbon. The drawing also clearly shows a humanoid figure with large head in relation to its body. It's also explained that they have an extra string in their DNA, are approximately 4 feet tall, inhabit the third, fourth and fifth planets in their solar system, and have a population of around 21.3 billion. Underneath, the telescope has been replaced by something more complex. 1 year earlier, a strange crop circle had appeared in the same place. Is this the same illustration as in the sender's code? Is this the correspondence radio telescope?
Never mind the fact that if I overlaid the octahedron part of the 64 tetrahedron grid over top the crop circle, it was a perfect fit. This compelled me to continue to study these things, and as I was studying advanced physics and continuing to advance my theories, and I realized that there was eventually crop circles that were perfect representations of the 64 tetrahedron grid that were emerging in the crops of England. And then vector equilibriums coming out of the crops of England with singularities at their center including the information about the boundary generated by the tetrahedrons, so that if you knew that each tetrahedron generates its own boundary, then you would add them here and generate this other geometry which has been popularized as the seed of life, and then a crop circle to tell you you've decoded right. And so this was like a code that was being given. I was very excited about that.
Once again we see a face, but this time there is an unmistakable resemblance to something extraterrestrial. The picture also contains a print, somewhat similar to that of a CD, with something that appears to be a coded message. This formation also has a new type of design, this time with horizontal line patterns of variable thickness, similar to that of a TV picture. The message on the disc is similar to a spiral band built up of many boxes. But data expert Paul Weige manages to decipher the message.
And I had to enlarge the disc quite substantially on the computer and run some image analysis over it to make it clear so that I could see what was a standing tuft and what was flattened. And while I was doing this, I noticed that every so often there was almost a mistake in the diagram. It was like there was a tuft, where the little square tuft, it had done sort of half size. And I thought, that's a bit odd, and it seemed fairly regular. I was going round, and I sort of counted up, and it was sort of literally every sort of 8 bytes or whatever. And I thought, 8 bytes, and you know, from computer side, is obviously some sort of binary code. So then I did the straightforward thing. I just converted it into ASCII, which is the standard sort of computer language that you encode the alphabet in. And of course I then started to get words forming out, and I thought, I'm getting somewhere here. So I then did the whole thing for the whole lot, and got this message.
The message is in English and reads as follows: Beware the bearers of false gifts and their broken promises. Much pain, but still time. There is good out there. We oppose deception. Conduit closing. Many have been surprised by this message. Are there aliens with such faces that we should be aware of? Or is this a picture of the sender? Does this indicate the start of actual close contact with neighbors in the universe?
I continued to study it, and there was very much information that was coming out of the crop circles that had to do with fractals, the way those spheres, each boundaries of the tetrahedrons divide. Here we can see it in another crop circle where the central part of the sphere divisions it has these crescent that seem to indicate rotation, angular momentum, which is what we're going to get into in a minute or after lunch. And then that division of space was fractalized over the field. And then eventually even structures like this that showed these spheres dividing in a rotational pattern. This one crop circle right across from a very well-traveled highway, which has Stonehenge on the other side. Very large crop circle that appeared, and then even larger ones, like so, that showed that spiraling division of space, that dynamic, and now I was starting to really link into I believed I had found a fundamental structure of equilibrium for the vacuum state. Now I had to understand the dynamics that fundamental structure generated in the field equation, the dynamics of it, not the static view of it, but the dynamics of it. the angular momentum, the rotational part of it, the field equation that emerged from it. Because remember, the vacuum state geometry would be the structure that goes towards infinitely small, that collapses into singularity. There's the other side of the equation, the feedback, which is the radiative side, which has all these energy levels and all these dynamics in it, and that had to match to the geometry of space.
If you sit out here in this field, you know, especially for a night maybe, spend a whole night in this circle, in this geometric pattern, which at this time is a complete mystery, you can sit here and you can ask your own fundamental questions, and there's no need for TV or culture, religion. You know, it's like a personal little church for a night, and you know, it's actually very healthy, and it certainly should be looked at very seriously before being ridiculed. Usually the ridicule is stemming from fear rather than fact.
Personally, I think the message of the crop circles is really important, and I think they are one of the most important things happening on the planet at the moment. I think they speak of Earth changes. I think they speak about changes about human evolution. I think we're being stimulated and pulled forward to consider all kinds of possibilities for the fact that the reality which we perceive at the moment is not in fact the entire reality at all.